Welcome back to the American College of Surgeons Bulletin Brief from the Front Lines. With me today, I have the immense pleasure of being able to chat for the next few minutes with Alex Gorsky. Alex Gorsky is known to not only every surgeon, but probably everyone in the world for being Chief Executive Officer of the largest healthcare company, Johnson & Johnson. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, Steve, it's great to be here, and I'm always honored and humbled to represent the great work our 135,000 employees around the world do every day.
Well, thank you, and you're a great spokesperson and a great leader. Towards that end, you've recently led the development of a vaccine that has been approved and is now available in the United States, approved by the FDA and now available in the United States. Perhaps you could share with us a little bit about the rollout of the J&J program since the emergency use authorization.
Yeah, Steve, well, as you can imagine, it's been a very exciting, several weeks, let alone several months, with the, recent approval by both the FDA as well as the CDC for our one-dose vaccine. And here too, look, it's really remarkable to think about the progress that our scientists, our physicians, our engineers were able to make in such a short period of time. And when we actually saw the data that was going to be used for the submission, we were so excited, particularly to see such a strong response in severe disease and it being completely successful in keeping patients out of the hospital and from dying, which of course is so important, even with many of these variants where our vaccines were tested and with a relatively high incidence rate at the time. As you can imagine, in addition to the science and the biology and the chemistry and that piece of it, we also had to really ramp up the manufacturing. And I don't think ever in the world before has somebody taken on a challenge to do 100 million vaccines over the course of a single quarter in a year. Nonetheless, with the cooperation and the partnership of more than 10 different partners around the world, working closely with the government, recently announced the partnership with Merck, we were able to get 4 million doses out the door almost immediately upon approval. And we're going to be doing tens of millions of more in the ensuing weeks, all holding towards our commitment in the second quarter and beyond to having 100 million and then close to 1 billion doses by the end of this year.
Those are very, very impressive numbers and attestation to your leadership and your 135,000 employees around the world, all ensuring success of the program. But it didn't happen overnight. And there was a recent interview with you in the Wall Street Journal. You mentioned billions just now in terms of vaccines, but in that interview, you also mentioned billions in terms of investment over time. And perhaps you could give us a glimpse of the background work that enabled this success under the gun in the last year of COVID.
Well, sure, Steve. Well, look, I'm sure as many in the audience today can appreciate, significant research progress takes a lot of investment. And they're rarely just a linear shot in terms of the path that we take. There tend to be ups and downs, twists and turns along the way. And that certainly has been the case with our COVID vaccine. As mentioned in that article, this goes back nearly 11 years ago, when as part of a greater aspiration to try to understand how we might as a company play an even more important role in preventing disease from happening in the first place, we made an acquisition of a company called Crucell. And that company had a number of platforms that we were working on at the time. And as we went through the discovery and development process, there were unfortunately several programs that dropped out for one reason or another. And it led at one point actually to a write-down of that company of almost half the value that it was when we originally acquired it. In excess, the acquisition itself was over $2 billion and the write-down was about $1 billion. However, out of this acquisition, there were two really important capabilities that we held on to and that we began to experiment in other areas. And that was one, this AdVac vector, which, think of it as almost the rocket ship that delivers the payload of this spike protein for the COVID-19 virus, so that your body will actually allow the vaccine to enter. And then the second was a manufacturing process that would allow us in a very protein dense environment to rapidly scale up very large numbers of doses. So think of it like a 1,000-liter beaker or bag where we could make tens of millions of doses versus traditional methods. And what we were able to do were apply these technologies in very short order, literally within a matter of weeks when we got the genomic code, that put us in the position where we are today. But I think it's a great example that there's always a certain amount of risk involved with research and development. It tends to always take a little bit longer than you originally thought. And there's usually things that you uncover that you would never have anticipated or dreamed about before you actually go down that path. But we would not be able to do what we're doing today had we not made those decisions.
So clearly great decisions and everything in place at the right time. You mentioned the partnership with Merck. How common is it that two large companies would work in synergy to accomplish a mission?
Well, I'm very, very proud of how the entire biopharmaceutical industry and companies are collaborating and partnering. And you're right, frequently these would be competitors that we would be competing with day in and day out in other, specific product areas. But in this case, I think all of us would agree these are very unusual times, very unique times. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to take unique and different kind of steps as we go to battle, as we go to war against this virus. And that's what we've done in this case with Merck. Merck is a fantastic, science-based, iconic American company that has a rich and steep history in vaccines. And in many ways is a perfect complement to us, where they have manufacturing as well as drug substance capabilities. And by leveraging that expertise, it's going to allow us to accelerate and increase the number of doses that we can produce and make available here in the United States, let alone around the world. And look, I'm so proud of my good friend and colleague, Ken Frazier, who's the CEO of that organization, and now Rob Davis. Our teams are working well together. I think we share a common value system and commitment to patient. And we're excited to have the government involved to help facilitate this. And again, we think it will really have a significant impact as we move through the rest of 2021.
And it is amazing leadership to be able to put aside those competitive industry differences for the good of mankind, just to get things moving forward, the good of humanity, I should say, to get things moving forward, and make sure that the common goal is met, to have enough vaccines for every man and woman who wants one on the planet. Speaking of which, your vaccine clearly has certain advantages in terms of temperature for storage, in terms of number of doses. How will that afford people in countries outside of US, Western Europe, and so on from being able to avail themselves of vaccination programs?
Well, Steve, from day one, we recognized that this virus, COVID-19, was a threat to the entire world. And therefore, if we were truly going to make a difference in help in eradicating it, that we were going to need a global solution. And so very early on in the process, when we were actually designing some of our original platforms and candidates, we tried to start with the objective in mind of having a safe, effective, convenient, at best a single dose, and one that required minimal logistics outside of what would be expected of a standard vaccine program. And by, again, doing a lot of upfront work, as a carpenter might say, measuring 3 and 4 times and cutting once, we were able to come up with this particular approach. And we knew that whether it's in a rural county, for example, in Pennsylvania or in Michigan, let alone a developing world where you may only get a single opportunity to vaccinate a patient, that having this kind of profile with a single dose was absolutely critical. And so we are clearly working with the United States government. We're working with the EU, but we're also working extensively with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with Gavi and CEPI and the WHO and others. And we will have hundreds of millions of doses available to the developing world in the back end of this year, and more than 1 billion as we move forward in 2022. Because look, around the world, we're only going to be as strong as the weakest link in the chain. And so it's so important and incumbent upon all of us to get as many people vaccinated here in the US, but let alone around the world.
While we're talking about that very commendable, laudable approach to what you're doing around the world, maybe you could share some of the other programs that J&J has for addressing some of the healthcare disparities that have really been highlighted during this pandemic.
Yes, Steve, look, another unfortunate outcome of COVID-19, and I believe, and we believe, is the realization and really the spotlight on how communities, and that could be African-American communities, Hispanic communities, and others that have been underserved, arguably for decades, have really borne a major part of the brunt of this disease. I mean, if you look at morbidity, mortality, overall outcomes, I think it demonstrates that we need to do a lot better, and we need to do more. And as the world's largest healthcare company, we felt that one area where we should lean in above and beyond what we're doing as a company to address issues of diversity, to address the issues of inclusion and inequities, that we could also play a very important role with the healthcare system. And that's here in the United States, but that's really around the world. And so, we're looking across our entire array of activities as a company with how do we go about looking at disease? Should we be taking more of a focus on diseases that have a particular impact on many of these segments and populations? What about the way that we conduct our clinical trials? How do we ensure we have better representations of many of these groups? What about our role in training physicians? As you know, Steve, we played a major role in the training of surgeons through decades. What can we do to increase the representation minorities in physician programs, nursing programs, specialty programs, so that, again, we can have much better representation, much better participation that we believe will ultimately lead to better care in many of these communities. So these are some of the steps that we're currently taking. We've also got to make sure that all of our training materials, our educational materials are adapted and are best suited for a very diverse group of individuals. So, I think for all of us, again, there was recognition due to COVID, and it certainly put a big exclamation point. I think we all need to do more, and we're trying to start and do our part in this way, and obviously willing to partner with organizations like yours and others to really try and change the trajectory on this curve and to make a big difference.
Well, you certainly are making a big difference, Alex, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate the support that you give many organizations, the American College of Surgeons and others, in helping advance education, helping advance research, helping increase public awareness about problems, which ultimately help patients. And some of these things, as you say, were uncovered by the pandemic. So we're all having to reset the way we do business. And the next question I'd like to ask you then is, what are some of the lessons from the pandemic that you'll carry forward when hopefully it's more in the rear view mirror than the front or side view mirror, and we're looking back? What are some of the things that you're going to keep with Johnson & Johnson going forward?
Well, look, I think there's a number of important lessons that we can apply to healthcare systems, that we can apply to companies, that we can apply to society. And one is really this better understanding, I believe, that we now all have of the importance of strong global public health programs. Because if there's a few things that we've learned during this pandemic is we don't have national security, we don't have economic security, we don't have security as a society if we don't have strong public health programs in place. I mean, look at the trillions of dollars, look at the number of lives, look at the just impact overall on kids going to school, on other things in society that we are now dealing with as a result of a public health care infrastructure that was not fully prepared for this kind of a pandemic. And so I think going forward, whether it's the way we think about, making sure we have adequate inventories of PPE on hand, how do we quickly design vaccine capacity that could surge? How do we even faster adapt clinical trials for new therapeutics? How do we do a better job of sharing information, the creation of diagnostic tools? Hopefully, all those are going to be lessons that we can apply to prevent the next pandemic. Secondly, Steve, I think it's just been a massive uptake of technology across every domain in healthcare. And I don't care whether it's data sciences, cloud computing, connectivity, sensing systems. I mentioned diagnostics earlier. I think we're going to see more and more of these technologies, AI, ML, become just inherent and part and parcel to almost everything that we do in healthcare. And I think that represents a tremendous opportunity for us. I think we should never just adopt technology for technology's sake, but it's clear that had we not had some of these tools in this particular case, we would never be able to get to the point where we are today in the outcome. So I think likely the next decade is going to see a pretty significant increase in the uptake of technology. And last but not least, I think a very important lesson is the importance of helping our employees, frankly, be resilient and deal with these kind of surges. Because the human toll on doctors, on nurses, on hospital workers, on researchers, on frontline workers who've really been, at ground zero through this, it's tested them. And I think too often in the past we've had, sometimes a cavalier attitude of, well, you just have to keep going on. And we recognize now that whether it's their physical well-being, their mental health well-being, the support that we need to provide them with, that is very important for them to be able to continue to provide the service, the care that we all need to be able to work our way through this. So I think those are some of the more important lessons, certainly, that we've taken away, and I hope we can help to address going forward.
Thanks very much, Alex. I'm sure you will continue to address them. And some of the things you've mentioned, like cloud and AI and some of the other things, lend themselves to the remote format as we're doing here today. Is that going to be a positive impact on customer service, particularly as we're looking at rural and remote places, that your team can speak to us as surgeons and explain things that wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to explain in person as frequently?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think, again, across healthcare, let alone across our company, if you would have asked me 13 months ago if we would ever be able to close 4 quarters, really not missing a beat across all of our countries and regions, given the size and complexity of our country, I would have really challenged it. And it's similar in healthcare. I mean, there are a lot of healthcare systems, we're seeing maybe a few dozen telemed kind of engagements prior to COVID. Now suddenly they're up to 3,000. And I would like to think that while it won't necessarily replace the face-to-face interaction, it can augment it, it can complement it, and it can help us, to your point, get care to rural areas faster. It can help us elevate the level of care in some of those areas by being able to connect in these virtually ways, hopefully catch some of these conditions from developing into more serious issues down the road. So yeah, I'm quite bullish and quite optimistic about the application. And you know what? The other thing is we've all gotten a lot better. We figured out how to use them, just as we are right now. And I think that's going to build confidence. And in some cases, we're even getting feedback that even seniors now are recognizing that, hey, this is a pretty good experience. In fact, I think some consumers will be demanding it going forward.
Yeah, very interesting perspective, Alex, and I do tend to agree with you. Let you have the last few minutes for any additional comments which you might wish to make or insights that you'd like to share with us.
Sure. Well, look, I think all of us have learned through this, the importance of, I was talking earlier about not only our public health system, but really just the importance of healthcare. And I just would like to use this as an opportunity to thank all your surgeons and all the people listening in today, because I know you're providing healthcare to people around our country, let alone around the world. And I think all of us understand ultimately that if we don't have innovative, strong, resilient kind of healthcare systems, everything else is at risk. So, on behalf of our industry, on behalf of Johnson & Johnson, thank you so much for what you've been doing the last 13 months. And we look forward to working with you to help create a new normal on the other side that I think can clearly acknowledge the challenges and the difficulties that we face, but build an even more exciting future.
Thank you very much, Alex. And we also thank you for all that you do to support us and our patients, and all that you do to collaborate with us to ensure that we can together optimize patient outcomes throughout the entire world. And ideally, one day, give everybody the exact same access to the exact same optimal outcomes through working together. So it's been a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you ideally at some point in time in the not too distant future in person.
I'd like that, Steve. Thank you again very much. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.